White letters on a black screen. Voices from the Knitting Circle. Discussion panel and live Q&A. Thursday, 12th of November, 2020. An evening with the cast who recreated the remarkable voices depicted on film. Talking with director Julie Mack, who describes the extraordinary 7-year journey of this documentary, exposing shocking stories that uncover unpalatable truths about the long care system. This is a recording of the Zoom online event. Vital exposure, cutting-edge theatre, vital stories. The company logo appears at the bottom. The words vital exposure appear handwritten in ink. The ink fades from red to orange. Panel: Julie McNamara, director. Mandy Colleran, actor. Deni Francis, actor. Penelope Freeman, actor. Clare Edwards, British Sign Language interpreter. Part 1.
So all of us in this very eccentric universe gathered here in the mosaic Zoom bricks tonight. A big warm welcome. Let me see, we've done British Sign Language interpreter Clare Edwards. I will do vague audio description as we potter along this evening. But basically we're sitting in very eccentric environments. What we're looking at is mosaics of little bricks with beautiful faces in it. Deni Francis tonight is wearing quite a low neckline, I'd say, but a rather fetching ruche neckline. Oh, it's even lower, thank you, it's elasticated. Oh, slipped off one shoulder there for us. She's got 2 bits of bling on tonight. Deni's got long dark hair and beautiful brown skin and is mixed heritage, and I love to say this, Irish Indian, thank you. And maybe you'll say something about why that mattered in Galway in 2016. As I look along the mosaic bricks, I get to see Penelope Freeman next. And Pen is against this kind of white ruched background, which looks to me vaguely conferencey, like blinds or something. I'll ask you about that later. What?
Police cell.
A police cell. Oh no, I can see now it's wood. Yes, it's painted white anyway. So yes, I'm staring into the, it looks a bit Nicole Ferrari kind of blonde spiked hair that's been tousled. You've scrubbed up well tonight. I'm very impressed, I have to say. Pen's looking great. Yes.
I wanted to look as different as I could from Nan in the film.
Well, that wouldn't take much, would it really? You did well, I have to say. Anyway, Pen, white woman, looking very weathered this evening. I think she's been to Cornwall, but that's personal information, not saying another word. Fotini Galanopoulou is here and is our absolute maestro behind the scenes, my puppeteer. And then I'm looking at an image of our Mandy Colleran, who is a white woman with big black glasses. They're fantastic, those, actually. They frame your face brilliantly. A brand new, what it looks like, headset with a microphone. In fact, you look like you could be in charge of the whole event, frankly. Yeah, our Mandy, small of stature, white woman with the most beautiful blue eyes I'm staring at. Anyway, great. Mandy will be our voice all the way from Pine Street in London. I love Pine Street. What?
Cheery Clerkenwell.
Cheery Clerkenwell, I love it, yeah. Now then, I'm going to ask, first off, each of our actors about the process we went through in the Knitting Circle. But before I actually dive on them, I'd like to talk a little bit about this piece of work, which, to be honest, it's one of the pieces of work that's closest to my heart in my, I was counting the other day, 38 years in disability arts or disability-led theatre work over time. And really at the heart of this piece of work is some of the wrong women that I'm still writing about in the kind of the background. I've just finished writing a chapter that's going to be produced actually or published next year in a book called Creative Activism. So many of our wrong women will be represented there. And some of them are here tonight on the panel, and some of them are certainly in the background. I've noticed, yeah, we've got Vicky Reeford-Sinnott from Little Cog is in the house, who did the Wrong Women Conversations the wrong woman conversations, they were called. And many, many others. If I haven't seen your name in the sideline, just, you know, a quick hello in there and I'll pounce on you. Oh, I've just seen the lawnmowers are in. Brilliant. And yes, I was with the lawnmowers on a brick in a Zoom just a couple of weeks ago. So I'm really glad you could make it. Very swiftly, because you know I can go on. The Knitting Circle was actually the casual name we gave to disguise a women's group that I ran in a long care institution called Harperbury Hospital many years ago. I was training as a drama therapist. A lot of people don't know that because I never registered. I didn't like some of the politics, shall we say, in that particular sector of the world. And I still have doubts. But I love what I learned in the process of training as a drama therapist. And one of the things I was required to do in my 2 years training in, I had to do psychoanalysis. So 3 times a week I was in psychoanalysis. I had to do group therapy. I had to learn all about psychiatry, all about psychology. I learned, one of the most important things I learned was about power dynamics inside group process. And that, and the threads of it and the tools in that, I've embraced in every piece of work and every space I've ever worked for the rest of my life. I was also required to do a placement somewhere nearby, and for some reason I was offered Harperbury Hospital. When I went there, I was offered somewhere to live because I was homeless at the time, and so I lived in the nursing quarters. I should have done 3 months there. I ended up doing 2 years because once I had seen what was going on inside there, I felt I couldn't leave it alone. And I certainly couldn't leave all of those souls inside that I'd lived and worked alongside. So 2 years later, I eventually left, having colluded with Margaret Thatcher's policies of decants, emptying those big long care hospitals and moving people into what we thought of as community care. Although there were so few resources in the community, it was an empty experience for a lot of people. However, I went back to listen to some of the voices of the people who were in the Knitting Circle. It was a women's group. I was told should never have happened because when I asked Sister Mary Francis whether I could run a women's group and bring people together that I thought might well be able to have some say in where they were going to live inside the new decant of community care, i.e. tipping everybody out into spaces they were ill-equipped to be in. I thought that they might at least have friendship groups, people they were familiar with, that they'd grown with and lived alongside. It didn't always work, I have to say. That group had to be a knitting circle. Even though I don't knit, I never learned to knit. I'd like to learn. Well, would I? No, that's probably a lie. I think I'm past it now. And other people can knit far better than I. But going back to the voices from people who had been in that original group and then gathering the fragments of people from a call out we put out, I gathered 72 stories from people from all sorts of different spaces. It wasn't just Harperbury Hospital in the end. So Paulette Randall was the director who was on our creative team at the time. And we decided we would cast 6 actors with some kind of connection, some tenuous link perhaps, or maybe even their own experience of mental health system. And how people responded to that was all well and good. We wanted to match them with 6 former patients, 6 former members of staff, and we brought in a number of different consultants and people who had lived that life or supported the policies or challenged the policies or who were activists during the day. And we brought them in to work with us. And we sent people off with 3 questions. And when we brought them back, we hot seated people in People Show Theatre in our beautifully shabby little rehearsal room that actually was on the grounds of where the Cray twins used to have their gym, a fact that I like to throw in this story. From the stories gathered, I wrote the script. Out of those stories that the actors gave to us and the characters they inhabited in the stories they brought back, we teased out the themes. So there's more, much more, and the rest of it has to come from our actors. I do know we've got some of our storytellers online tonight, and I'm just delighted you could join us. I'm thrilled that I know two of you have been brought back together for the first time in a long, long time, and you're watching through your slightly dodgy Toshiba television screen back there. Thank you for joining us. I have never forgotten you and never will. And special thanks to Gertrude Gray, who I know is tuning in tonight, because I will never forget what you have done, not just for the women inside the system, but for the women in Broadmoor. That will stay with me for the rest of my life. So I just want to honour your name and thank you for being with us tonight. And so I'm turning to our panel. And the first person I want to speak to tonight really is Penelope Freeman, because Pen, I want to talk about process. I'd like you to talk about your process, even though I'm led to believe that actually you didn't appear in the first version of the Knitting Circle, and you've got your own story about that. But I'd like to hear your story about your process, because it was quite an unusual one. But I leave that for you to tell us about.
Right. Well, I was in at the beginning, for me as an actor, and I've been an actor all my life, so but this was an incredibly different process. So I've been acting for over 30 years, or around about 30 years, when I came to work on the Knitting Circle. And every actor knows when they come into a room, they're going to meet strangers. You have to quickly work out how you're going to work as a team, and just let your personality and everything go while you're in there in the process of creating. And so I think on my second day, I was sent with an actor I didn't know, a fantastic actor called Hazel Maycock. And we were given 2 tickets to a seaside resort, where we were to be met by the lovely, incredible Gertrude Gray, who that should be a very big book, an extraordinary woman, who then acted as the facilitator for Hazel and I to meet Mary and Rosie, who you also see in the film. The idea at the time was that Hazel would specifically detail stuff that she got from Mary, and I would for Rosie. That way we could then share things and observations, because ultimately we weren't about to just play those characters. We were going to create composite characters. It was always very clear from Julie Mack that that's what we would be doing. And so it was vital that we didn't at any point try and parody or mimic or characterize one specific person, but use their history to augment the writing, if you like, which was done. It changed a lot, wouldn't you agree, Julie Mack? I mean, we started with, I guess, a framework script, and then what all the actors, because Hazel and I went off and did ours, but there were 4 other actors who then went off and did similar things, similar journeys to meet other people. When we came back in the room, obviously what we brought back allowed that to augment the framework script that J. Mack had already put together. And then we were able then just to push the boundaries and in a sense, prioritize or find new things that actually were probably more pertinent to the ultimate story that we told than perhaps we realized at the beginning. And what really struck me, when you are given the responsibility of meeting people who've been through a system, is that you always come from it from a point of view of empathy and outrage at what they went through. And what you have to remember, and what was very chastening, was especially when we met Mary and Rosie, they didn't have a comment of poor me, how sad, self-pity about their journey. They told it to you like it was, without saying, wasn't this bad? They just told us. And that's actually even more sort of upsetting, if you like, that there came with it not an acceptance, but just the attitude of this is how it was. And that is brilliant from an actor's point of view, because it gives you a clarity and it gives you an insight, because there's a tendency, I imagine, with most actors, which is to try and find something and try and elicit emotions from the audience. And that's not your job. Your job is to tell the story, and your job is to inspire thought and engage people. And so to get them absolutely these sort of clean palettes of these two women, and prior to meeting them, we had sat in a cafe with Gertrude Gray and heard her story. It gave immediately a sort of 3D, if you like, idea of the challenges that were ahead of us, rather than when you normally just come to a script, you read the script, it's off the paper, and then it is your job to create. So it was a wonderful approach to a piece. And then as time went on, and I have to say, I wasn't able to do the first R&D, which happened at Soho, just because my appendix just decided to explode a few days before then. And the lovely Deni Francis stepped in and took over a part that one of the parts I was due to do, because we were double cast at the time. So I left the rest of the cast in the lurch, but I did hobble along to Soho and see the first show. And then later on, when we were able to kind of take the show out on the road, I came back, by which time, sadly, Hazel was unable to do that. And I then stepped in to Hazel's shoes and played her part, and the part that I was due to play was recast again. So it was good for me that I'd been with Hazel on her journey for the first piece, and it worked very well. So then by the time we came on to do the film, you only see just tiny little snippets in the film of the show, in actual fact. But I just think it works supremely well, because I think what's important about the film is that you're getting the testimonies of people who are involved, and incredibly moving ones. I mean, the brilliant shot of Gertrude's hands just telling her story about the Grey Ladies in Broadmoor, and the extraordinary, I have to say, Derek McCarthy, when he came and spoke to us, and he was a whistleblower, and he's in the film, and you see him read that poem, you can't help but be moved. But this is a man that, you know, who was so deeply affected by what he witnessed, what he experienced, and is still with him now. And you saw it all just in that poem that he read. And another incredible man. I don't think we met anybody when we were creating this whole piece that you could say, oh, I'm sorry, they had another agenda or whatever. They were just people who would just wanted to get their stories out there and for it to be seen. And so full marks, Julie Mack, for really getting all that together and doing it, because it's just been an extraordinary journey for us over the 5 years, I think, that we did from Soho to doing the film, or 4 years. So
Longer.
well, I mean, I know it's longer, like going back in history, but I mean from one to the other. But anyway, so that's me done, really.
Thank you. I have to say, perhaps what is significant to plop in here is Derek McCarthy became chair of the what's it called, the Quality Care Commission, or the Care Quality Control or something. Anyway,
Quality Care Commission.
Yeah, Quality Care Commission. Okay, and to have somebody like that in that position, I think is, well, fabulous, really. Carries great weight because of what he'd lived through. I mean, he did 54 years inside the service. He was 19 years of age when he first began. I want to move on to Deni Francis, who was also with us for the first iteration, and through many different kind of versions of the Knitting Circle and the offshoot projects that emerged from it. Deni, do you want to say something about your process?
I'd love to.
Yes, I'm gonna bring you in.
I was going to say, yeah, I started at the beginning and you can't get rid of me. Here I still am. I just want to say something about Derek McCarthy, and it's a bit confessional on my part, actually. It was incredible, and for people who don't know, he was in his position from 19 years old, clearly young and vulnerable in many ways from the story he told us. But I can remember having looked at his book that you brought in, Julie Mack, that you wouldn't any of us take home, but we were allowed to look at it in situ, and reading his story. I can remember just being horrified in this sort of very judgmental way that he'd seen all this abuse going on and done nothing, until I know he had later, but I was sort of stuck in that. How could you were part of this? And I never forget when he came and he sat in that chair, and I can remember I was just feeling this massive like anger at him and thinking, get a grip, get a grip. And I do remember saying at one point, I couldn't help it, why didn't you do anything earlier? Do you remember, Penny?
Yeah.
And everyone sort of looked at me like, oh, that's the question. We're not. But anyway, that's how I felt. And I just remember his face. I can't remember what he said, but he looked at me, and the look in his eyes just spoke to me of what it had done to him.
Yes.
That he hadn't. I mean, he obviously, I can't remember exactly his answer. You might remember, Penny. Your memory is fantastic. It was probably something like, I'd had no power at the time, and I was sort of didn't know what to do and where to turn. But I just remember that look in his eyes, because I think that he asks himself that question over and over again.
Yes.
He actually said at the time, don't you think I haven't asked myself that?
Yes.
I knew you would remember. I knew you would remember.
That's the stick he had to beat himself with for the rest of his life.
And I felt, in one way, terrible that I'd said it, but not in another, because he needed to almost say that, I felt. Yeah. There was that moment when he looked at me like, so if you're listening, Derek here, I'm sorry that I put you on the spot in that way, and I'm really glad that you did speak out when you did. Anyway, so talking about the process, it was just amazing from the beginning. And I kind of had a feeling it would be, because I'd known your work, Julie Mack, and Vital Exposure, and watched from afar and couldn't wait to get in there. And then when I was invited to be part of this, I was like, this is so exciting. But, I hadn't really expected it to be such an incredible journey. And I think there's something I really want to say, which is, and as an actor, there are many different ways to direct, to create theatre, to create stories, to put teams together. And there's not one model that's better than another necessarily. There are some things and practices that I think aren't particularly healthy, shall we say. But I hadn't ever experienced what you did, Julie Mack, which was to create a company that was really very sort of diverse in all different ways. And then to talk about it very transparently about, we want to work in a way that's confidential. These stories are precious. We are going to be engaging this. You're going to feel emotions. You are going to be upset. You are going to need to process. To actually have that out in the open from the beginning was incredible. Maybe that was drama therapy background coming in, I don't know. But it was amazing. And we all had to sign these fantastic confidentiality agreements, which were amazing. They were so beautifully, I remember reading it thinking, yes. It felt such a privilege to be working in this way that immediately was so transparent and created that safety so that we could do this work. And I've been in situations before where you've been asked to do all kinds of things with no thought about what that emotional cost might be. And it's my job to take care of myself in that way. But thank you for that. So that's something really important about this process. And then it was just incredible, the people that you brought into the space to speak to us, Derek, and then there were others. When the story about the grey women in Broadmoor, I can never get that out of my head. That it was, and so powerful that that I didn't meet her, but you met, said I'm sorry, I can't remember your name.
Gertrude Gray.
Thank you, Gertrude Gray. Incredible. Just those sort of stories, but were traumatizing and yet inspiring at the same time because someone did something about it. And then I had the absolute privilege to go and meet
Shreya Mehta.
Shreya Mehta. And I felt privileged before I kind of went thinking, you know, it can't be easy to tell a stranger your story or to invite, but I was invited into her home. And then I was just blown away by this incredible woman with her energy. I don't know if you're there, Shreya, telling me about the stories of resistance and power, and about the Black women's group set up in the hospital in the locked unit, of the poetry that was written. And I was just like, wow. And we talked about this a lot in rehearsal, Penny, if you remember. Sorry, Claire, am I going fast? About, we didn't want it to be wallowing. We didn't want it to be people going, oh my gosh, isn't this awful? I mean, yes, they're awful, some of these things that happened. We wanted to show the strength. We wanted to show the resistance. We wanted to show that humans can survive this stuff and tell those stories with power and with truth without, as you say, just telling them simply, Penny, as you were saying. And sitting listening to Shreya, I was like, wow. If I can channel any of this energy, that would be a credible thing to be able to do. This story about how you continue and you're still creative and you're challenging, and then you're educating yourself, so you're becoming the expert of your own experience, of your own medication, of your own treatments. So that was fantastic. And I love, like Penny was saying, the fact that there was a script there, the wonderful Paulette Randall, who just, I'd go home from rehearsal saying, well, we just kind of had fun today. We play, like Paulette makes it feel like it's not really work, but you're really working. And pulling it all together and being able to bring so much of what I'd gathered into the process was fantastic. That's probably enough to say about the process, isn't it? Oh, except for that, I did step in for you, Penny. I'm afraid, you know, I did my best with Sister Mary Francis. I did what I could in the time I had. And I've played various roles in the iterations, because then I played a different role again. And then in the documentary, I played the role which I never played on stage, actually, the particular character monologue. And just finally, really, I think the other thing that was really powerful was when we went to Liverpool and then to Galway, to those, one was a kind of a political theatre conference, one was an academic conference. And Julie, you spoke beautifully about the project and the women's stories. And I performed some of the monologues. And that was incredible. Not in a theatre context, one in the conference context, one in the academic conference, to bring those stories into that room. And I looked around, I could see people, you know, with their eyes, tears, connecting to those stories. So that was amazing.
Thank you. I think one of the things I remember about the conference in Galway, which was in 2016, was 1916 Home 2016. And when we were first invited to be part of that, it was about bringing our stories from monologues from the Knitting Circle to that conference, because it was about incarceration. It was supposed to be, in fact, during the time of the commemoration of the Easter Rising, we were doing a pushback that was about estrogen rising. So, of course, we had a piece that was about wrong women being incarcerated, and we wanted to push back mightily. And what I love about you doing those monologues there, Deni, was that we were sharing a platform with a survivor from the Magdalene Laundries. And in 2014, or was it, no, 2013, forgive me, on February the 19th, 2013, Taoiseach Enda Kenny at last made a public apology to the survivors of the Magdalene Laundries. And that was done in the Dáil, in the Irish Parliament. We did our own apologies at the end of our gigs. I remember the first apology we did was at the Blue Coat in Liverpool. And Mike McCartney was in the audience, actually, because he asked me about it afterwards. and Madeline Hannigan saying, why do you think it's your place to apologise? And I said, I think we should all apologise because we all colluded with this system, all of us. There's been no apology for the people who were thrown away in that long care system, who were incarcerated in the bins, as we casually called them, the bins, the loony bins, you know. So it mattered greatly to me that we were there in Ireland just a few years later, and meeting with that person who was on the same platform was just amazing. I'm getting a flash that says we've got a 5-minute break, but actually I'd quite like to bring Mandy in before we have a comfort break. If anyone is deeply uncomfortable with that suggestion, I'm just having a look. Oh, I've been told that's fine. Thank you. Lovely. Do flag up in the chat room if you've got any questions. You can also flag up your questions via sending them to our Fatini. You can put them in the chat line, or you can, yes, we've got a Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom. I'm assuming we all have the same kind of layout. I should never make assumptions. It makes an ass out of me and you, or you and me. Anyway, we've got 2 questions popping up. Oh, David Roach all the way from Canada. Wow, fantastic. I'm going to come back to that in a little while. But before we pick up on the questions, I do want to bring in our Mandy. And Mandy, you're still with me, aren't you?
I am, love.
Good. I would like to make connections with the character you played on film, who was Lizzie Jakes.
Yeah.
And I have to say, all of the names have been changed to protect people's identity. And of course, any surviving family. So protected characteristics, of course, have been altered. And in some cases, voice prints have been changed as well. So you'll never find them if you're out there looking. I do say that we went and filmed on the grounds of Harperbury Hospital long after I was told it had been demolished. And it's still there. And since we did show our film and attached it to our tour, they've changed the name of Harperbury Hospital to Kingsley Green. So, and it's not a golf site, by the way. Anyway, there you go. We made some shallow impact. Mandy, I'd like to bring you in to talk about the links I'm making, really, and we were making about this whole term, the vulnerables at the moment, because I remember reading that in the notes of Lizzie Jakes.
Yeah.
You know, she was sectioned at the age of 18, and yeah. I don't know what became of her, but I'll leave that with you, and you would talk about that process. I'd love you to talk about your own view on where we're at with the vulnerables now.
Well, I was very privileged to be invited to perform in part of the film. I had known the piece right from it. I was also in the audience of the Soho studio, like its first incarnation, because I was actually a theatre officer for London Arts at the time.
Oh, yeah.
With my official hat on. And I remember then recognising, you know, how powerful a piece it was. And then seeing, I think there were two incarnations later on stage, and I saw both of them. And I was very privileged then to be asked by Julie to come and participate in the film. And you gave me the monologue for Lizzie Jakes. And the interesting thing was that Lizzie, being the character of Lizzie, had been deemed, she'd been institutionalized because she was deemed to be vulnerable. But if you looked under the surface, what they meant with vulnerable for Lizzie was that actually she was considered to be promiscuous. Now, obviously, you know, that's a very loaded word. But I thought what was beautiful in the monologue that you wrote, Julie, was that actually as a young girl, she was actually talking to a grown-up man, but she was interested in his bike. She wasn't actually interested in him as a, and you know, you just think, how often was she misinterpreted? You know, as a little girl, as a young woman, just wanting people's attention, wanting conversation, interested in this postman, not because he was a postman, but because he had a new bike. And so that was really interesting. And it was just a pleasure then to be able just to dip a toe into the world of the knitting circle, really. And I think, you know, you mentioned to me when you invited me to do this as well, just how, you know, that term vulnerable has been reincarnated now, particularly in the time of COVID. You know, and one of the things, it's a tricky one because now we're deemed to be medically vulnerable. And, you know, I don't know, there will be people in the audience tonight who, like me, had a personal email from Matt Hancock, no less, on this second lockdown. And what struck me watching the film again, actually, was just how, you know, how those labels can both be useful in terms of potentially getting you treatment for any condition you may have, but actually what they do, particularly those kind of hazy labels like vulnerable that are a bit abstract, what they also serve to do is they act as band-aids. And what they do is they push people further from the centre of life to the margins.
Yeah.
And so people are further marginalised by that. And the further marginalised you are, the less visible you are. And the less visible you are, the more vulnerable you become to abuse, neglect. And I think that's kind of what's most worrying now. I mean, again, watching the film and listening to all the stories and, you know, both the staff and former residents talking about the abuse was just how easy those things occur, how easily they, and what's even more frightening, and I think what Deni was referring to, is, you know, just how acceptable they become, how it becomes the norm, you know, that people actually, well, you know, I know they shouldn't, but, you know, well, it's all a bit awkward in here, so yeah, sometimes people let off a bit of steam and they hit a member, you know, they hit one of the residents, but it doesn't make them a bad person. But a very good nurse. It's just, you know, every step, and those kind of things, and you think, you know, that's really, really scary, and that whole thing about institutionalization, and then you think, well, now what's happening is that people are being trapped in their own homes. You know, many of us are being asked to shield because we're medically vulnerable, and that's fine if you've got a good support network around you. But actually what it does, if you haven't got that and you are open, you know, then you are more open to abuse. You know, people can run off with your bank card. If you've got to give someone your bank details or give them your bank card to do your shopping for you, how can you really be sure that they know what, you know, that they're buying you what they need, what you need, and also they're not also buying themselves, you know, £200 worth of clobber from Zara as well. To physical abuse, to neglect, you know, to people not arriving on the time that you asked them to come, to people leaving you with in physical neglect where you end up ill, where you end up hospitalised, to the ultimate in terms of being physically abused. So by being labelled vulnerable, the irony is that it actually makes you more vulnerable to neglect, to cruelty. And I think that's a real concern. And as I say, my real concern is by doing this in the times of COVID, yes, we do need, you know, it is good to acknowledge that some of us are more at risk from catching COVID. And if we do catch it, it could be slightly more catastrophic than it could be for anyone, you know, any other Joe or Joanne in public. But as I say, what it does do is it pushes you from the centre to the margins. And that means also that not only are you vulnerable, but your voice is not heard. Your voice is diluted until nobody even bothers asking anymore. Because people, you know, it is long time no see, long time no hear. Yeah. You know, absence doesn't always make the heart grow fonder. Absence just makes people forget about these people. And, you know, it's always,
I'm going to have to ask to stop you there, but we're going to come back to you after a short comfort break for all of us. But I would say our sign language interpreter needs a break just now. Mandy, forgive me for cutting in. And I will say that Mandy is not being held captive, that actually she's chosen to keep her own camera off. And we've got this delightful image we're looking at of our Mandy. Personal choice, Mandy, or if I made you do it?
Oh, I'm supposed to say it's a personal choice, aren't I, Julie? Wasn't that the script? Hello? No, I'm just not very well. So I'm actually reclining on my bed, and I thought that was an image people didn't really need.
I would have quite liked it.
Yeah, well, that's you, Julie.
So can I ask for a 5-minute break, and we'll see you all in 5 minutes. Actually, sadly, I won't see you all. You're all in hiding. But anyway, we'll be back.
Part 2.
Mandy, I wanted to come back to what you were flagging up, because I thought there's a huge issue there about disabled women and sexuality and assumptions made, you know.
Yes.
And there's no doubt in my mind that those situations were really casually treated by some, I hate to say it, but it's probably true, you know, people who were born male, arriving into those institutions and using the women as comfort women. I do know for a fact, and I'm going to say it out loud, that Jimmy Savile was a visitor regularly. I'm sorry to raise the dead on that one, but casually given access. I also know that there was a prostitution racket that was run in the nursing quarters. And so there was a certain culture of casual abuses around that village in Harperbury that was a 2,000 bed unit, you know. Don't get me started. I want to actually open out to our visitors, because we've had some interesting questions. There's one from David Roach over in Canada, who asks, how did I choose Penelope Freeman and Deni Francis? I don't know why you've been picked on, but there we are. To answer that question, I put a call out for a start on every sector that I could think of, but I knew of both Pen's work and Deni Francis's work. I also knew Mandy Colleran's work very well. I got them excited by the story first, and then dragged him in to meet Paulette Randall. The casting decisions were not mine, actually, because Mandy was on my first choice list at the very beginning of the Knitting Circle. We had some brilliant actors involved. We had Fiona Whitelaw, who's currently in our White Pariahs, Quiet Rebels, which is another piece of work that's gathering a storm at the moment. We had Becky Allen, we had Ali Briggs, we had Caroline Parker. We also had a change of horses in terms of our directing, because we lost Paulette Randall to one of the biggest gigs on earth, because she worked alongside Danny Boyle on directing the Cultural Olympiad for the Olympics in 2012. And we then gained Antoinette Lester and Ruth Warrilow, which was quite exciting. Ruth, who is now my niece-in-law, actually niece, who gives a shit about the law. Yes, Ruth married my nephew. Out of that, we have, you didn't know that?
Congratulations. No, I did not know.
Well, they've got the third child on the way now. So, I mean, look, this piece of work has had a big impact. I've had another question here from somebody asking, what percentage of the original storytellers appear in the film? There's only 8 of the original storytellers appear in the film, or body parts appear in the film. Everybody's identity has been changed. Percentage, I'm not great at maths. Of the original stories, we had 72 stories. I created composite characters. We created them together. I couldn't have done it on my own. I can't answer your question. I don't know how many percents. I don't think I care. But what we did was bring in as many stories as we could. And there were common themes throughout about abuse, about disruption of the human rights, about lack of education or information, about bullying, about longing for real friendship, about looking for love in their own direction, and about the mischief that got them through. Are there any other questions coming through? Oh, I've had another question from somebody else in Canada here. Okay, I love it. Oh, thank you. Well, it's not a question, but it's a response. Thank you very, very much from this person in Canada who says, this talk was recommended by the professor of a course about disability arts and activism. I love the documentary. And I'm thankful to be here for this conversation. Thank you so much for that feedback. And I'm so sorry I can't read your, here's a fess up now. I've got a visual impairment attached to my brain injury. I can't read this light blue and white. I've no idea who anyone is. You're all very welcome. Thanks for coming.
I'd just like to pick up on what you said there, Julie, as well.
Yes, Mandy, please do.
Mischief, because I think what Deni referred to earlier about resistance, because I think, you know, obviously we there's no understating the power of the stories that we heard in terms of all those issues about neglect, lack of power, people's voices being taken away, people not able to develop, given the space or the wherewithal to develop emotional links with each other, relationships, sexual relationships. But nevertheless, there was resistance, and I, you know, one of the joys, and I was reminded watching it again, for me was playing, although there was no dialogue, playing the character of a woman called Anne Denton, whose resistance was she had a bit of a thing for chocolates, and apparently every year she was given a present of chocolate covered Brazil nuts, and she really wasn't partial to the nuts. So every year she would suck all the chocolates off the nuts, dry the nuts off, then wrap them up and give them gifts to the nurses. And apparently, I think you said in the film, Julie, it took them 4 years to discover that that's what she was actually doing. And I just think, how brilliant is that? Do you know what I mean? It wasn't even just a question of, I'm just going to suck the chocolates off these and throw them away.
Yeah.
It's that I'm going to give someone else the nuts. And I hope she gave them to the horrible ones, to be honest. I bet.
And you know what? There's a little bit more to that story, because it was usually the League of Friends, the ladies' League of Friends used to come in at Easter and at Christmas, and oh, bless them, you know, they came with good heart and good intention, but I don't think they realised what they were working with, you know. And they always had gloves on when they shook people's hands or offered their hand and all that. And so there was something about it. Anne took umbrage, you know, so she decided she would give them, yes, the chocolate Brazils that came from them through the nurses that invited them, who were actually kind of very palsy-walsy with the League of Friends, and they got them back.
Marvellous.
Yeah, there's something lovely about it. There was also Celia, who used to suck her sweets and then wrap them up again. She always had something dodgy in her pockets. And, yeah, she would often, that would be a bit of a trade, like she'd try and get something out of you with some of her sticky sweets out of the corner of her pocket, or tea bags. I remember tea bags was a good currency. Yeah. Listen, I'm trying to pick on questions as they're coming through as well.
Mark, there's a question that I think came through a little while ago from an anonymous attendee that said, Julie, you worked with long stay locked in individuals. Do you think a similar project could be done now to expose the revolving door, repeated short stay admissions from hospital, home, possible homelessness? That kind of touches a little bit on Medicine's Monstrous Daughters, but there's a good question for you.
I think that's a good question for you, Pen, because you've just directed Medicine's Monstrous Daughters and you were robbed, I heard.
I was robbed. We were locked down 3 days before we opened. Part of that question I can answer was, yes, the next project that we did where we worked together, Mac and I, was on Medicine's Monstrous Daughters, which was 2 pieces. Monstrous Daughter, which was written by Mac, and Medicine, which was written by a fantastic poet. That's the way I'm going to call it, called Omi Kemi. And that very, very clearly juxtaposed how the mental health system was 100 or so years ago and the mental health system now. And essentially the whole design of the piece and the whole way the story is told was shows that once upon a time we locked people away. Now they are actually kept out of where they need to be to get help. And Omi Kemi's piece, Medicine, is about 2 people who are trying to access a medical centre, a mental health unit, to get their meds. And it's a dialogue between the 2 of them about basically the coping strategies they use and what happens when that doesn't work. It also taps in historically to the story of Henrietta Lacks. Both the actors in that piece were Black actors, Black female actors, and it tapped into the story of Henrietta Lacks. Haven't got time to talk about who she was, but you can go and have a look for those of you that don't know. But Henrietta Lacks is responsible for the longest DNA chain of cells ever. Cells were taken from her body without permission in the 50s, and they still exist today for people to experiment on. 32,000 patents have been applied for on her, based on experiments done on her cells. The Lacks family, when they discovered this in the 70s, couldn't even get healthcare in America. So that's a whole other story. But certainly Medicine's Monstrous Daughter, which may have an outing at some point, somewhere, in some form in the future,
Yes,
deals a little bit with that.
Out, but it will.
So that half answers the question.
Mm. The other thing I'd like to flag up is there is another activist from the movement, actually, called Debbie McNamara, no relation, but probably equally barking mad. Deb, if you're there tonight, thank you for coming, who created a brilliant undercover Channel 4 documentary about the abuses in short stay homes for homeless people in crisis. And what was happening in the revolving door around the mental health system. It's a brilliant piece of work. She won an award for it, actually, through Mental Health Media Foundation. So we're going back a bit. Must be about 15 years old, that documentary. It's time somebody made a new one. So yes, thanks for flagging that up. Deni, do you want to talk about the work you've been doing for
at Kids Time?
Children and young people. I think this is a good moment to talk about.
Yeah. So a few years ago, 20, I was asked to join a psychiatrist called Alan Cooklin and Peter Bishop, a family therapist, because they wanted to start a group for families where a parent has a mental illness, because they were doing group work as the family therapy movement does, but it was with the parents, but they weren't doing anything with the parents and the kids. And I can remember meeting Alan, cousin, it was a long time ago. I remember him saying, we're finding that these families, when people are, being seen by their GPs or hospitals, or they're taken into hospital, no one ever asks them, have you any children? And if you have, where are they? How are they? And he also talked about children's services and adult services in mental health not being joined up. So because I was working at Greek Street at the time, which was a hostel for homeless women in Soho, women's collective, non-interventionist, fantastic, anarchic place. That deserves a play of its own, actually. We should talk, Mac. I said, yeah, I'll come and do it. I'm up for that. I'm doing a bit of acting, running workshops. Yeah, I'd love to. And so I started this journey, having no idea where it would land. And 20 years later, there are probably over 50 workshops. There are some in Spain, in Barcelona. There's some in Germany. There's now a charity called Our Time, who you can Google and find out about the work that's done. They're there to campaign. I still work into the workshops. And the idea behind it is that families come together and they talk about mental illness, and it's not a taboo. It's open, it's transparent. We talk with the kids and the parents together. We always meet and have refreshments and things. It's after school, feed people. I do warm-up games. Then we'll do the science bit, talk a bit about something. It could be anything from our emotions, what happens when we're frightened, or it could be what's manic depression, or it could be what you want to know about mental illness, medication, whatever. There's a multidisciplinary team, so there'll be a psychiatrist, a drama practitioner, and could be teachers, social workers. And it's not therapy, but it is therapeutic. And we all meet together like that, and then the parents go off and talk in one room about being a parent with mental illness. Kids stay with me or the drama practitioner. We play games, and we make a film, a story, usually based on something we've talked about, but really whatever they want to, and we film it. And then we come back together, have pizza, and then we ask the parents, what did you talk about? not just a précis. And then the kids show the film and everyone sits there going, wow. And I've learned so much from working. It's been an incredible journey. And what I'd say is that when you talk about resilience, these kids having to sort of deal with what they'll deal with, and the stigma still, most of these kids, if I ask them at school, have you told your friends, you know, like how it is in your family? Hardly any of them ever in 20 years have said they have. Very few. And so therefore they're kind of compartmentalized lives. And Kids Time is a place they can come and just be all of who they are, which is something I'm very passionate about. Yeah, so I don't know what, I could talk forever and I won't take up much more time.
No, but I will flag you up. You've written a chapter in a book.
Oh,
so
yes.
Talk about that book.
And I now talk about my book.
Briefly.
So it's got a very catchy title.
What is the title? Because I can't.
Building Children's Resilience in the Face of Parental Mental Illness. Very catchy. Conversations with children, parents and professionals. I've written a chapter which is about using drama for resilience with young people and the process in Kids Time. But what I love about this is, yes, I've written in it, the psychiatrists and psychologists have written in it, but so have the kids. And some of these kids have got chapters in here. I say kids.
Yeah.
They're grown up. One's a psychologist, one's a doctor, one is a psychological wellbeing practitioner, and they've written chapters about their experience. And I remember these kids, and this is going to age me, I know, when they were 8 years old, coming to my first workshop at Camden Islington. And like now, so that's the wonderful thing about it. It's not just professionals talking about it, it's people, and the parents are making commentary on the workshops and their children being in them. So that feels like a positive thing that's happened.
It is brilliant.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Pen?
Yeah, there's a question come up from Denise Young, and it's really for Mandy. It says, I'm really interested in the concept of vulnerability as discussed by Mandy. I'm in Canada, but we're having the same challenge, claiming the label when the government is trying to cut critical funding, and then being made more vulnerable by having the label, and therefore having decisions made by government and others on behalf of the vulnerable. Not sure what to do. Share wisdom, please.
Wow. I think the problem for us at the moment is it's difficult to have wisdom, because I think wisdom you get often with hindsight, and wisdom is something very, because we're all learning about it, we're all on the hoof with it at the moment. I think one of the things that, you know, is being very clear, obviously here and obviously in Canada for you, Denise, is, you know, we're being labelled as vulnerable and stuff, but also in that vulnerability, instead of giving us extra resources to cope with the situation that we find ourselves in, the fact that we do all have to isolate and stuff, we're actually getting less resources. So none of us are getting things like PPE given to us for our support workers, PAs, carers, whatever term you choose to use. So that's difficult. I think the important thing is that we keep discussions like this going and that we share our experiences. I think we have to also, unfortunately, really keep an eye on what government and local authority organisations or state organisations maybe in Canada, I don't know what the political structure is, we have to be very well aware of how those are operating as well, because certainly, you know, certainly even just in London, the very different boroughs are operating very differently. Some have been appalling and have actually, because of the change in legislation that the government instituted at the beginning of the pandemic, have actually been able legally now to take away support for disabled people and others in terms of supporting people to live independently. But not many local authorities have not done that. You know, they are trying their best to maintain the services that we need. So I think it's a really difficult thing. You know, it's the constant balance. I think that as disabled people, certainly we're always trying to, you know, it's how do you keep your life together? How do you maintain what non-disabled people take for granted, which is an independent life?
Can I just ask you, Mandy? see, you've used two words that you've used vulnerable and independent, and in that question, I think the word vulnerable becomes loaded when people want to use that against you. You say, I'm a vulnerable person and I need this, and then government, bodies, official bodies, use that word vulnerable to actually disenfranchise you. And I wonder if there's a way of finding another word, or using the word independent vulnerable people as a marker to stop that happening from those bodies, to say, yes, you are vulnerable, but you are perfectly capable if you had the support. And therefore, is it possible just to extend that label, for want of a better word, and put something like independent vulnerable people, or would that be helpful?
I think it probably would, but again, the problem is that we're dealing with a situation that's very current. And I think, being part of the disability movement, the debate is still raging about what we call ourselves.
Yeah.
And that's after 30 odd years. So I think, yes, it would be, but unfortunately at the moment, we don't have the time, the space, or the resources to address those things. And what I think you're hitting on, Penny, as well, is that the word vulnerable, the labels that we're being given are labels that are being stuck on us. Yeah. That's the real issue. They're not how we would choose to describe ourselves. And at the moment, we're not in a position to be able to make those demands at the moment, because people are still, as I say, just trying to keep living their daily lives safely.
I agree. Can I just interrupt now and say, I'm very sorry, we've gone over time apparently. I can't actually see the clock, so I have the puppeteer telling me what's happening. Just very, very briefly, I would say this film is still on if you want to see it again. It's up until the 15th of November. It's absolutely free. Watch it again. I need to get it out there as much as possible. Somebody's asked me if I achieved what I set out to achieve. No, I didn't, but I'm still at it, and there will be more. However, the importance is we've raised the issues and we're talking about this, and I do think that Mandy and Pen, this conversation we're having about what we call ourselves and how that is used against us is a crucial one, because we're being told to shield or decide for ourselves whether we should shield or not shield when lockdown lightens up, etc. Going back to the film, can we ask you for your feedback? I think you'll be sent something by Fortini, who is our puppeteer this evening and done a brilliant job. Thank you, Fortini. Thanks so much to Clare Edwards, our BSL person. Thanks as well to our captioner this evening, who is Jen. Jen, I want to say cinnamon, but I don't think it is pronounced cinnamon. Forgive me, cinnamon. Anyway, but thank you very, very much for your support. Forgive me for any slip-ups tonight. Somebody asked me along here, would I want all of the stories that have been recorded filmed in full? We'd have to start again. Of course, I got permissions through people's legal advocates. Everybody was supported in a neutral space with their support worker. That was part of the process. Ordinarily, we would not suggest people continued relationships with people outside of this project. Other than me, I got greedy, and I've had Christmas in July with several of the former people who are, former people, I love that. Former patients and former members of staff, some of whom have become activists themselves. I'm in touch with every single person, some who've sadly died along the way, because I've been at this since 2009. And actually I've been at this since 1982, in truth. So a long time, but
when you were a child, really, obviously.
Oh yeah, clearly I was just probably an egg bouncing back the sperm at that point. Anyway, thank you very, very much to our panelists tonight, to Deni Francis, Penelope Freeman and Mandy Colleran. Thank you most of all to Vital Exposure for putting up with me so long. And thank you to you, all of you, because if you weren't here, why would it be worth doing?
Credits. Thank you for watching. Video editor, Phil Bierman. Voiceover, Rhiannon Kelly. Vital Exposure. Cutting Edge Theatre. Vital Stories. www.vital-exposure.com vitalexposure.co.uk. You can follow Vital Exposure on social media: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, LinkedIn. Supported by Arts Council England and City Bridge Trust.